Thank you, number one, for inviting me to worship with you guys tonight and just into your community, your church community here. It's awesome. I love it already. I'm obsessed with it. And I've never really been to Cumming before, but you guys are great. Are you all from Cumming, or do you come from different places? Whatever. Okay, good. So I'm glad I'm here either way. I'm not quite from here. I'm from Tallahassee, Florida. Who was that? Florida State, baby. Woo! But I've actually had the opportunity to speak a lot of places over the past 8 months, and every time I go somewhere and I get ready to speak, the pastor they always come to me, and whether on the phone, we actually had a conversation about this, or a sit down, and they say, James, what can we expect? You're kind of crazy, you're a little bit radical, so we don't want you leading everyone astray, and that's great. But I always say the same thing, and I say this. I say that you can expect less people there next week than there are this week, And I really hope that that's not due to my lack of speaking skills, which it may be. Don't run away. But I actually think that's probably more because the Jesus movement is not a popular one. We're following this crazy radical Jesus guy who had a thing for turning things upside down, who was all about loving your enemy, or the children, those who have the mind of a child would enter the kingdom of heaven, or the least would be the greatest, or the first would be last. And I know at least here in America and many places all over the world, we don't embrace that. So what we're doing right here is tonight, as this group of people, we worship, we are following a guy who came into the world and said, my kingdom is nothing like this place. Nothing like this place. It's not of this world. So what we've got to do is first we got to understand what he was talking about. He was talking about, when he said kingdom, a political reality is what that was. That was a political term. It was a whole nother way of life. So when he said kingdom, he was saying, my White House isn't like your White House, or my economics are not like your economics. My politics are nothing like yours. It's very, very, very different. And so we go back into 1 Samuel chapter 8, and we understand that the Israelites, God's chosen people, had God as king, but at that time they dethroned him. He was their king. And verbatim, they said, we want to be like all the other nations. We want to be like everybody else. And God said, you know what? Give them their king. Give them their king. Then they got Saul. We had David 40 years later. And since then, we've been caught up in this system, this bureaucracy as Christians that we thought we were part of and that we thought we had to live through. But no, we're supposed to be on a whole nother plane, something completely different, diametrically different from the way the world is. And so for me, I've been a Christian my whole life. I grew up a Christian. And, I was raised in church. I really can't remember a time when I told you I wasn't a Christian. I did pray a prayer 5 times, like a lot of us probably did. But I look back at my life, and as I was saying I wanted to be like Jesus, I realized that not one facet of my entire life looked like Jesus. Think about that. You say you follow Jesus. How many of us end up looking like him? And Holy Spirit, convict, if it will. I'm not here to do that. But what I want to do is talk about some pretty huge ideas tonight. I hope that you'll have a porch light moment. I hope we're not looking from a bird's eye view here, but from a satellite view, and really embracing God's way of life and questioning, what does it mean to be like Christ? And for me, it all changed last year in May. It was crazy. I've been a worship leader for a long time, but I was always telling people that we can't come into this place and do this with our hands and then go out and not do this with our hands to the poor and the oppressed and those in the margins of our community. But I never had really done that myself. And so I went to Nicaragua for 4 days last May, and I saw the least of these. I saw some pretty messed up stuff. But I met a prophetess there, okay? And she prayed over me. And she was actually Jamaican, by the way, so this is totally appropriate. And I'm going to do an accent for you in a second. So her name was Miss Ruby. She was like 4 feet tall, 4 feet wide. It was awesome. And she was sitting on her chair, right? And she had her little feet were like, it wasn't like no knees. It was just like feet just sticking right off the chair. It was awesome. So she prays over me. She's like, get down on your knees. So I was down on my knees. She slapped some oil on my forehead, and the guy in the back of the room was sha-la-la-la-la-la, and he was doing his whole thing, and it was a really intense moment. And the first thing that she said to me was, James, the Lord wants you to know that you have not been obedient. And I questioned her on that because between you and I've never smoked a cigarette, never done drugs. I'm still a virgin. My first drink was at 21 years old, and I've been drunk maybe twice. And so who is this lady telling me I haven't been obedient, right? Well, I confront her with that. And the sweet woman, I actually told her it was BS. I got a little angry. But I was like, I don't believe what you're doing here. I think it's crazy. You know, I came to this foreign country to cry, to feel tingly for something, right? And she tells me that I haven't been obedient. So she says, James, actually she said my child, but here's how it went. My child, you haven't been obedient, yeah. But, and I'll stop because this is intense. So she says, your obedience isn't defined by what you don't do. Your obedience is defined by what you do for the world that God so loved. I'm going to say that again, grasp it, because your obedience is not just defined by what you don't do. There are great benefits to abstaining from certain things. But your obedience isn't defined by that. It's defined by what you do for the world that God so loves. So somehow, in our pursuit of holiness as Christians, we've gotten to the point where I guess we've convinced ourselves that the church should be known for who it is not. But when the church is known for all that it doesn't do, it ceases to be the church that Jesus had anticipated. Only by doing can we begin to offer hope and love to a world whose cup is desperately half empty. So I'm actually going to share with you a little bit. I just changed my mind a second ago about what I would talk on tonight. So hopefully you can hang in here with me. On the side, I write for a magazine called Relevant, and I just finished one today, an article. And I wanted to share it with you guys. So I'm going to kind of read a little bit here and then just talk a little bit. But for the most part, this is what this article was about for me, and hopefully you will be able to reap some benefits from it as well. But was that where you are in your life right now, you know, a lot of us are in high school, some of us are college and young professionals, but whatever season you're in, you are called to Jesus, who loved the poor, who loved the sick, who loved those in the margins, who touched the untouchables. So you are called to do the same should you want to be like Jesus. Does that make sense? And so that's what this is about. So let me share this with you tonight. I really hope you get something good out of this. Dr. Martin Luther King, I'm a big fan, right? He once said this in his book, I believe the Trumpet of Conscience. I think Call to Conscience. Maybe that's what it is. But he says this, that there is nothing wrong with obeying a traffic law that says to stop at the red light. And unless you're like a 16-year-old girl, like I think most of us would agree, right? Yeah, okay. Don't hate me. I'm just messing with you. All right. There's nothing wrong with that. But when there is a fire raging, the fire truck, it goes through the light. And when there are people bleeding to death, the ambulance, it goes straight through. And he said there are disinherited people all over the world that are waiting on a brigade of ambulance drivers. That's us. Waiting on a brigade of ambulance drivers to run the red lights of the current system until the emergency is solved. So the truth is, there are fires of injustice raging in our world. And the sad thing is this, that most of us are driving cars instead of fire trucks. And probably the greater travesty is that somehow we as Christians have convinced ourselves that some of us are uniquely called to put out the fire. That's not true. Friends, if your building is on fire, you toss water on it. You don't pray for someone else to bring a bucket of water. So I want to talk about the red lights. There's no direction in which you can turn your head and not understand that our world is absolutely broken. And there are red lights everywhere. So while you're in college, while you're in high school, whatever season you are in your life, there are red lights, and you have to decide what that's going to be. Some can come in the form of human trafficking or sex trafficking, the exploitation of workers, or the ecological impact our apathetic lifestyles have on the planet God gave us. And still others resemble, genocide or unjust wars, or a disregard for people with AIDS or homosexuals, or the complacency of preventable diseases that we can easily cure, like malaria or a stomach bug. Obviously, we can go on further with this, but you get the idea. Now, once cognizant that little girls in Nicaragua, was the case for me, little girls in Nicaragua were being sold as sex slaves. Little girls like this big were being sold as sex slaves for first dibs on trash. First dibs on trash. There were people living in a dump, and they were selling their little girls to the garbage men so that they could get first dibs on trash. Once you're aware of that, going into debt so that you can sit on beach at Christian pop culture camp no longer seems that important. Does it? And when our loud and trendy worship songs are drowned out by the cries of the hungry, there's this lingering emptiness within us that one who claims to be in the light cannot simply brush away. And God understands this. In fact, he gets very upset with this sort of like ritualistic pop culture Christianity. In Amos 5:21 through 24, he says this. And this is awesome. So I'm going to say that again. Amos 5:21 through 24. I would definitely write that down if you can. He says this. And the Message version is actually pretty interesting if you want to look that up. But this is, ESV, I believe. I despise your religious feasts. I cannot stand your assemblies. Even though you bring me burnt offerings and grain offerings, I will not accept them. Though you bring choice fellowship offerings, I will have no regard for them. And away with the noise of your songs. I will not listen to the music of your harps or electric guitars. But let justice roll down like a river, and righteousness like a never-failing stream. There is something more to our faith than what many of us have been shown. We've been asked to lay it all at the cross of Jesus Christ. And been left empty-handed with nothing in its place except for, a Christian bracelet or a Christian t-shirt or a whole new set of music on iTunes. There's something more. And like you guys mentioned earlier, is that for the past 8 months I've been living on the streets to care for the homeless folks that I meet, and as I'm searching for that something more. And while it may surprise you, I don't believe I'm called to homeless people, at least no more than you are. I'm simply called to Jesus, and Jesus, who we read in Philippians, didn't consider equality with God something to be grasped, but he became like nothing, it says. He became nothing. Taking the nature of a servant, he humbled himself, and he became obedient. These are key: obedience, humbling, taking the nature of a servant, becoming nothing. This is the Jesus I follow. So no, there's nothing like, I don't want you guys to look up here and be like, wow, that's really cool. That guy's been convicted to go sell everything he owns and live on the streets and do that. There's nothing, absolutely nothing singular about me, nothing remarkable about me that should, you should write me off and say, oh, well, that's for him. So I guess I got to a point where Soren Kierkegaard, he's a Danish philosopher, and he said once that to admire Christ instead of to actually follow Jesus is not an invention of bad people, but one of good people who spinelessly want to remain detached and at a safe distance. So I guess I got to the point where I realized, you know what? I'm admiring Christ. I love his truth, but do I live it? Do I actually follow Christ? And I realized that I hadn't. So, but in the words of Rob Bell, y'all know who Rob Bell is. He's a pastor up in Grand Rapids, I believe, Michigan, at a church called Mars Hill. He said, for us, it's like a movement of anybody's, and Jesus calls them the JV, the B team, the not good enoughs, and he calls us to be his disciples. In the New Testament, James emphasizes that despite being a prophetic, fire-inducing weather manipulator, Elijah was a man just like us. So whoever you are, and no matter the city you're in right now, if you're in here for college or high school, no matter what it is, there are opportunities to be like Jesus. So being socially just in your community isn't just something for the few. It's for everyone that bears the name of Christ. And only in community, this community right here, this being the church being the community, will we discover the interconnected nature of our mutuality and fully comprehend the working parts of the body of Christ. Now in Jeremiah, we actually read something on communal living. This is really more focused towards the college students that I wrote this towards, but I'm going to share it with you anyways. It says, seek the welfare of the city where I have sent you, and pray to the Lord on its behalf. For in its welfare you will find yours. So God is saying that our well-being hinges upon the well-being of our community. After all, our love towards our neighbor is the second but equally greatest commandment to loving God. So what more suitable quest is there besides becoming a good neighbor in your community? So you see, in Jesus' vision of community, there is no us and them. There's only us. There's no mine. It has then become ours. And Shea Claiborne wrote in his book, Becoming the Answer to Our Prayers, that to pray our Father, as we start the Lord's Prayer, we say, Our Father who art in heaven. To say Our Father is not only a declaration of a heavenly parent, but it is a commitment to a new vision of family. So we simply cannot have God as Father if we deny ourselves, our sisters and brothers who live in need. And it's disheartening, honestly, to realize how little worth we attribute to the least of these, the ones deemed by our God to be the greatest in his kingdom. So now there is also a flip side to social activism that we can't overlook. In Revelation, Jesus tells the church in Sardis that while it has a reputation for being alive, it is but dead. And to the church in Laodicea, he states that any lukewarm person will be vomited out of his mouth. So yes, while it may be true that no lukewarm churchgoer will enter through the gates of splendor, having not cared for the least of these, as Jesus submits in Matthew 25, the opposite is equally true. That no matter how many trees you've hugged, no matter how many whales you've rescued or orphanages you've built, it's all for naught without the blood of the Lamb. And this actually became clear to me. I just took a trip and I spoke in Florida to a youth group. I was pretty excited. I was a little nervous, though, because Clothe Your Neighbor as Yourself had started at this youth group. And a lot of these kids purchased shirts, which actually allowed me to do what I do. But anyways, in this particular city, my shirts had become very trendy. They were everywhere, and which was great for me. But listen to this. So I was sitting in the back of the room, right? And I was just sitting there quiet, waiting for the pastor to introduce me so I can come up and talk. And I started to hear, I see the kids, looking behind their shoulder, and they're like, hey, it's James. They hadn't seen me in 5-6 months. And I actually used to be a youth pastor at this church, too. So, but they were like, hey, it's James, And I started hearing them, talk about my successes since I had last left. And, being on radio or TV or in a magazine. And I heard them talking about these things. And slowly they began to chant my name, to override the pastor who was actually also giving a sermon that night. It's completely rude. But so they started to chant my name. And And then the pastor introduced me, and the building just erupted. There were a couple hundred people in there. And by the time that I had reached this stage, the Holy Spirit just grabbed me, and he broke me in two. and I just sobbed, and I wept. And I asked God to forgive us for what we deem extraordinary, because it had become apparent to me that I guess we see these people like Mother Teresa or like Martin Luther King or even honestly Gandhi, even though he wasn't a Christian, so I'm not saying he's in heaven, but the reality is he looked far more like Christ than I do right now, and so I can't let him have that. So I want to beat him, but we take a look at these people and write them off. Like Mother Teresa, she said, "Don't make me a saint. Don't write me off that easily," quote unquote. And we've called these things out of the box. So I got up there, and instead of talking, I asked them a few questions. I said, "Raise your hand if you have a shirt. Does anyone in here have a shirt?" Every last hand went up. And on my shirts, they're like different colors, right? So I said, "Who's got 2 shirts?" Because people, they buy like 2 or 3. So, which I don't condone. I say conserve, don't consume. So if you do get a shirt, that would be great, but just get one. But they buy like multiple shirts. So I said, "Raise your other hand if you have 2 shirts." So actually like 50% of the people in there had both hands raised. Then I asked them this. In light of James, he says that don't merely listen to the word, but do what it says. And James, the book of James. And so I said to them, "Now, read off your shirt. What does it say?" They say, "Clothe your neighbor as yourself." And I said, "Say it again." I got them really pumped. And they were like, "Clothe your neighbor as yourself." And then I asked them, I said, "Keep your hand raised if you've actually done what it says." And every hand in the room fell but one. God save us. Obviously, living in the United States, we get it. Social justice and community are certainly in vogue. But when you live in a culture where, Chinese babies become accessories on the arms of A-listers, and Africa has become far more a trend than it even is a continent anymore, we have to ask the question of what it means to take a narrow path. In the Gospel of Matthew, that's what Jesus says. He says, "Wide is the gate that leads to destruction. Many people will enter through it. But narrow is the path that actually leads to real life." The life that Jesus said he came more so that we could have more abundantly. Jesus didn't just come so that we go to heaven when we die. Jesus came so that we could live life now and have it more abundantly. Anything else that comes in through the sheep pen, is what he says, is a liar, is a thief, is a robber. These things that promise us fulfillment, they're liars. Only Jesus will offer you fulfillment and real, true life. And so, wide is that gate that many people will walk through. But as a Christian, what does it mean to enter through the narrow path or go through the narrow path? What does that even mean? He says that only a few find it. Only a few. That's, to me, it's a little scary, but more it's like hopeful. Only a few will find that. So I guess the question is how do you live for a very unpopular kingdom, a very unpopular way that is rejected by the world and embraced by the few? Obviously, you don't need to be a Christian to build houses and dig wells. But I think the answer lies in that upside-down kingdom I was talking about, the one where the least are the greatest, and that, in Proverbs, we're supposed to pray crazy things like, "Give me neither poverty and don't give me riches, but give me my daily bread." This is where daily bread comes from, by the way. "Give me neither poverty nor riches, but daily bread only," so that basically I can depend on you. And the writer there was saying that, I don't want to have too much and feel like I don't even need you, or have too little and steal and curse you. That's a prayer that very few of us are praying right now. We're all trying to get to the top of the ladder, but remember, the first will be last. That's the kingdom you're in, should you choose to walk the narrow path. So I think that it's important that obviously for us to be in our community and know the community. My friend Joe, has anyone been down to the Safe House Outreach Program in Atlanta? You have? Awesome. Yeah, I've been staying there and really devoting a lot of my time in Atlanta at that organization. But Joe there, he's the volunteer coordinator, and we were talking. He was telling me a story about a church where he used to live. How am I doing on time, by the way? I completely lost track. About 5? Okay. My friend Joe was telling me about this church that was next door to a strip club, all right? And all the other pastors in the area wanted to picket line that place, right? But remember in Scripture it says that by our love for each other, they will know we've gone from death to life. So, but this church, they instead of picket lining, they showed love. They actually got this elderly woman, right? This frail little woman who I actually called yesterday, and her voice was like this. It was so cute. But she was like, "Hello, this is Gladys." No, I'm kidding. Her name's not Gladys. It's just an old lady name. Her name was Jeannie. So Jeannie basically was this person. She was this elderly woman. She went over to the strip clubs and started giving gifts to the strippers. She gave them gifts to show them that they are beautiful because they are made in the image of God, not because any man throws $1 at them. Eventually, the strip club shut down because the strippers kept quitting. That's awesome. Radical love changes a city. Praise God, right? That's awesome. And lately, my friends and I have been throwing Frisbee at, have you heard of Jurassic Park, Renaissance Park? On the street, they call it Jurassic Park. We've been throwing Frisbee in the park next to the homeless guys that are doing drug dealers. It's notorious for drug deals out there. So we throw a Frisbee over to the drug dealers. And sometimes it hits them, but we try not to do that. Anyways, at least lands near them, and then we're like, "Oh, hey, sorry about that, guys. Little help, and why don't you come over here and play with us?" And sometimes it works. Sometimes they do help us, or sometimes they do play with us, but sometimes they don't. But the truth is you can't love your enemy if you avoid your enemy. That's impossible. So go find your enemy and love him. Now, becoming weak to the weak, this is also something that I think we should touch on. This is an ideology that Paul the Apostle proposed. And when I met my friend Don recently, it became clear what this meant. Don is a commercial airline pilot, and not too long after Mother Teresa's death, the president of Albania's wife was a passenger on one of his planes. Turns out Mother Teresa was Albanian by blood, and this woman, the wife, was bringing back a relic to Albania to promote tourism. When Don asked what was inside, she told him it was the carpet Mother Teresa died on. I don't know if you've heard this story. It's kind of a fresh, new one, but it's intense. Apparently, Mother Teresa couldn't rationalize dying in a bed while others die in the gutters. So Jesus, who gave up a throne, she crawled out of bed and died on the floor. I mean, this lends a whole new meaning to love your neighbor as yourself. And it's a popular teaching of Jesus, obviously, but it's usually passed off as a fresh perspective on poverty rather than an intentional mandate for the church. So no, you and I may not be able to provide a bed for everyone, but we can certainly join them on the floor. Now, I also think it's important, we should make people aware of causes that are close to your heart. If you're young and you're not able to go homeless, which is not what I'm saying. I'm not saying, quit your job. If you have a job, high-paying job, keep it, do whatever you got to do. But I'm not saying to do that. I am saying, though, that there are plenty of organizations, though, that you can partner with that take up the cause of those in the margins. Now, when Adam and Eve ate the apple, they became aware of their depravity. And so making people aware is also very important. God walked into the garden at that point, and he was asking, "Where are you?" Which is much less a question of geography, but more one of biography. And it's a question he's still asking, and one a Christian asks to their community as well. So if you want to be like Jesus, I suggest this, because he hung out with the poor, you should too. If you want to be like Jesus and he hung out with the sick, you should too. If you want to be like Jesus and he stepped in front of the defenseless, drew a line in the sand and said, "Cast the first stone," then step in front of the defenseless. You're a Christian. You should too. That's what it's all about. So I say, go, be like Jesus, and whoever you find yourself among will be to whom you are called. And find your red light, because there's one on every corner of the globe and on every street corner you come to. We must never forget that for God so loved the world that he gave. And so a Christian does too. I want to leave you guys with this. Band, if you want to, come on back up. We're going to do one more song. But I want to leave you with this story. There's this dialogue in Chronicles of Narnia, Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe, the book, right? And Lucy's talking with Mr. Beaver. If you haven't read the book, beavers talk, animals talk. There's weird animal, human people in this place. But she's talking with Mr. Beaver. She's about to meet Aslan, the lion, right? And she says, oh, I'm rather excited. You know, I get to meet Aslan, or she didn't know he was a lion. I'm sorry, I just ruined the whole story. She didn't know he was a lion. But she's like, I'm rather excited. Tell me about him. And of course, I'm paraphrasing. C.S. Lewis is a better writer than that. But Mr. Beaver says, oh, yeah, it's going to be great. He's a lion. And she's like, whoa, I didn't know he was a lion. I should be rather afraid. Is he safe? Is what she says. And get ready for this. This is huge. Mr. Beaver says this. In no way is he safe, but he is good. He is good. So I propose to you this. As we sing this next song, and y'all go ahead and come on up here. As we sing this next song, and you lift your hands like it says to in this song, that's great. Lift your hands. But remember, it's all for naught if you don't go out there and put out your hands to the same Jesus that you're singing about. The same Jesus that you'll find in the girl's locker room who's slitting her wrist because she feels like she's not beautiful. The same Jesus that's drinking unclean water and will ultimately die because the church hasn't yet realized what it is to become. And don't be bitter against that church, but be hopeful for what it could be, because that is the hope for the world, the church of Jesus Christ. So go out there, put out your hands to those who are in need, who are in the margins, who are hungry. Put food in their belly. It doesn't get any more simple than that. Be like Christ, should you want to be like Christ.